Hampton Roads has a long-running high school and college sports tradition. It's time to give them the spotlight they deserve. This is 757 Saturday Sports Talk. Here is Matt Hatfield.
And we welcome you back to 757 Saturday Sports Talk with Hatfield and Young at the PLEX. And we're so pleased to be joined by a special guest as it's a big matchup in Norfolk on this Saturday with the Old Dominion Monarchs playing host to the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Wake Forest coming in at 2-0 overall off their victories over the likes of Elon and Vanderbilt. The Monarchs splitting their first two games as they lost up at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg to the Hokies, but responded with a big win over Louisiana last week in their home opener. And we're so glad to be joined by the longtime voice of the Demon Deacons with the Wake Forest Sports Network, Stan Cotten with us. Stan, thank you for stopping by. I understand we were talking before we went on the air here. First time in your 40-plus years of a decorated broadcasting career that you're making the trip to the 757 in Norfolk, Virginia. How about that?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I started this when I was 19 years old, 44 years ago. You guys can do the math. But, heard so many things about, the Norfolk area, Tidewater, and all the great athletes from that part of the country. And certainly that's true, but I've never been there. So I'm looking forward to being in Norfolk for the game and know the Monarchs are certainly well respected by Dave Clawson. You don't have to talk very long with Dave about, Coach Ronnie and what they're trying to do up there at Old Dominion. That they have his attention. I can promise you that. So I think it'll be a fun game. I'm looking forward to being at the stadium and again being there in Norfolk for the very first time.
I want to go there with you, Stan, because we'll get to Dave Clawson and all the elements, the matchups, the games within the game, if you will. 12 players from the Commonwealth Virginia on this roster for Wake Forest, and some significant names on the offensive side of the ball, beginning with the quarterback in Mitch Griffiths from Broad Run High School in Ashburn. You got the running back in Damon Claiborne, who was a record setter at King William High School, coming off a big game against Vandy out of the SEC. The wide receiver Taylor Morin, who was a state champion at Westfield High School in Northern Virginia. And Old Dominion's got some North Carolina flavor on its roster. I think about 8 or 9 players there. So, I mean, in terms of recruiting ramifications, this game has some meaning to both coaching staffs as far as trying to invade Virginia for Wake Forest and for the Monarchs trying to get some of that North Carolina talent, if you will.
Yeah, there are a lot of, certainly, as you mentioned, Wake players from talent-rich Virginia. I mean, that's not lost on Wake. And, who knows, probably back in the day and Wake's always recruited Virginia pretty well. I think this is probably one of the reasons why, Wake is in the Commonwealth playing this game. And I know that the Monarchs have a couple of ACC transfers. So just a lot of cross connections that always make kind of the backstories to some of these games interesting. And no question, this is certainly one that has several. And we had Damon Claiborne from King William High School there, not too far, I guess, out of the Norfolk area. But we had him on Coach Clawson's radio show on Thursday night, and he said he's going to have a lot of family and friends at the ball game, as you could imagine. And he really is one of those players who has just kind of burst onto the scene here. He when he got here, Wake Forest knew that they had a good one. He's got a track background as well. He can really, really run. And he's averaging well over 100 yards a game in the first 2 ball games this season. So he, I guess, will lead the Virginia-based charge of Demon Deacon players this weekend.
It's funny covering the high school sports and recruiting like I do with VirginiaPreps.com, part of the Rivals.com network powered by Yahoo Sports. I was telling one of our Rivals analysts as he was going into his senior year, this kid's really good, and his tape circulated to Claiborne, and he just kind of blew up. And Coach Clawson got a steal there with Claiborne, and he's gotten a lot of them going back to his days before he got to Wake Forest when he was coaching in Richmond. It is his 10th year, and Stan, I look at Wake Forest, and they're not getting the talk of the town as far as college football in the ACC. We know about Florida State being viewed, and rightfully so, as a national title contender, especially after its big win to open the season over LSU. You got North Carolina with some buzz after beating South Carolina, Duke with that shocking win of Clemson. What's wrong with the Tigers and Dabo Swinney's team? But I look at Wake Forest, and I see 7 consecutive bowl games, very consistent. They're 15-2 against non-ACC teams the last 5 seasons, and they're top 10 in the country in terms of FBS in wins since 2021. How do they get it done, and how do they do it in such a humble, quiet way where they just go about their business and don't get a lot of fanfare about it?
I think that's just life at Wake Forest. I remember way back in 2006, Wake was picked to finish last in the ACC. What'd they do? They won the whole thing and went to the Orange Bowl. So it's not just 2023. This has been going on a long time at Wake Forest. Here's a bar bet you can beat everybody with. Who's got the second longest running bowl streak in the ACC to Clemson? It's Wake Forest. The Deacs have been to 7 consecutive bowl games. Nobody in the league has done that outside of Clemson. And it's just, one of those deals where year in and year out, and I give complete credit to Dave Clawson. Year in and year out, the Deacs just get it done. They find a way to make the post season. They don't get a lot of 4- and 5-star recruits. They get more 2s and 3s, and hopefully most of those kids they can keep here 4 or 5. Well, with COVID, 6, 7 years, whatever it takes, and develop those players into really, really good players by the time they're a redshirt junior or a 5th-year senior. So again, going back to your point, Wake tends to more times than not fly under the radar, and that I think most programs would like to be that way. It certainly has worked for Wake in that they win more games than they lose every single year. And I think, again, back to Coach Clawson, he's the right coach, right time, right place to get the job done. It's it's a little different here at Wake Forest to put it all together. I mean, you got to find a guy that number one can get in school at Wake Forest. Then you have to find a player who can stay in school, and on top of that, you have to find a player that can compete with Clemson and Florida State and all the rest in this league. So Coach Clawson's found a way to do that. And again, I just think he's the perfect head coach for this current football team.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you bring up going back to the Jim Grobe days of Wake Forest when they were very good and they weren't expected to do a whole lot and they surprised a lot of people with that Orange Bowl trip. It's just, I find a lot of parallels being here from the Commonwealth to Wake Forest. They're obviously on a larger scale, Power 5 ACC to like a James Madison who's made that transition recently, a Sun Belt rival of Old Dominion's from FCS to FBS when they won a national championship under Mickey Matthews. And then they had Mike Houston win them a title, Kurt Signetti. They've remained relevant and be able to compete on a big scale. I think a lot of that goes to the athletic departments and obviously really good coaches and finding the coaches after you lose a really good coach. They've done that there at Wake Forest. Before we turn our attention to the Monarchs and what they pose in terms of the threat to the Demon Deacons in this matchup, explain for the audience, those that aren't as well versed in Wake Forest, watching them, which you see all the time, about this pace and space offense, because they're one of just 9 teams in the last 2 years to have 1,000+ points. They're on a list with Ohio State and Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, some pretty prominent programs. Just kind of take us through the offense and how different it is from other teams out there that Old Dominion hasn't seen before.
Well, the Digs certainly score a lot of points. They've scored more in the last 5-6 years than anybody in the league. And that's almost 40, about 30, 38 and a half, something like that. And it's funny because prior to this year, everybody called it the slow mesh. And Wake Forest did do that. Some, not all the time, sometimes. I don't know what the percentages are, but it's not, 80% of the time they run that. They do a lot of different things. They're a multiple team in a lot of ways. A lot of the decisions that the quarterback makes come after the snap of the football. And so you have to have a guy like Mitch Griffis, Sam Hartman before him, who's at Notre Dame right now. You have to have a very heady quarterback. And Mitch Griffis, as you mentioned, from Virginia, is one of those types of kids. His father was his high school football coach. And so he's grown up around, what does it take to be a really good football player? He knows all about film study and all the different things that his dad taught him in high school. It wasn't like he gets to Wake Forest and all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, this is what you have to do to be a successful college player. No, he learned a lot of those habits, really good habits, before he got to Wake. But there is this odd kind of slow mesh that Wake does use some of the time, and it's very unique. And it's been difficult for us over the seasons to call it on the radio, because the quarterback rides that back into the line of scrimmage and waits so long before he either hands it off, pulls it out, keeps it himself, throws the ball. And all these decisions, again, are coming post-snap. So it's a unique style of offense. It certainly has worked for Dave Clawson. Everywhere he's been, the offense that he's installed has taken about 2 to 3 years to kind of catch on. And then, if you look at where Dave Clawson was, all of his stops before coming to Wake, and he was very successful everywhere, it was that third year. And it was the same way in Winston-Salem when Wake Forest began to take off. Warren Ruggiero has been the offensive coordinator every day since Dave Clawson has been in Winston-Salem. So, but again, just a really stocked receiver room, probably 8 deep on the offensive line. They've gotten a couple of kids nicked up there, but they're so deep that they've got some guys that they can move around, mix and match a little bit. We found out last week the running back room is deep. Had to go down to the third team, and all Tate Carney did last week was rush for 117 yards and a touchdown, and Claiborne ran for 165. So, it's a football team that's deeper in talent than people give it credit for. Dave Clawson and his staff have really done a nice job over the last 3 to 5 years in recruiting. They've made some strides on the defensive side of the ball. Brad Lambert is in his second year at defensive coordinator. Brad was with Mickey Matthews, so was I, by the way, at Marshall 1,000 years ago with Jim Donnan when the Thundering Herd was winning national championships at the 1AA level. But Brad's doing a great job here. Wake is a faster defense than it has been a couple of years ago, or since he got here 2 years ago. Really good linebackers, really good at the safety spot, defensive back. Not quite as deep on the defensive front as they have been over the last couple of years, but certainly the players they have there, they really, really like. If they can keep them healthy, they'll be fine. And really one of the kind of unsung areas of a lot of teams, but for Wake, I think the first 2 games has been special teams. They've done really, really nice things. They scored on a scoop and score last week with a fumble recovery on a fumble punt. I think they've missed just 1 field goal. Punt has been good. Coverage teams have been really good. So just first 2 tests that Wake has had, all 3 phases of the game, they've looked pretty good, and Coach Clawson's pretty happy with those first 2 weeks. Now, you get on the road, you get in front of a hostile crowd, things tend to change a little bit. We'll see what happens this week.
Yeah, and this can be a dangerous spot, as one of the ACC counterparts of Wake Forest found out last year with Virginia Tech when they came to Norfolk, dropped their second matchup to the Monarchs in about 4 or 5 years at Old Dominion. So you get this lower end tier FBS program that made a transition from FCS several years back. You mentioned the great respect that Coach Clawson and the staff have for Ricky Ronnie, who's got an Ivy League background, was at Penn State as an assistant. Very interesting. It's a different team than they saw a couple years ago, as is Wake Forest back on September 3rd, 2021, when the Demon Deacons prevailed 42-10 at home. Only outgained the Monarchs 352-272 in that game. And coming into the year, Stan, a lot of mystery, a lot of unknowns for Old Dominion because they have 58 newcomers, 7th most of any FBS program, and 7 seniors, just the second fewest to New Mexico. Now 2 games in the books, a little bit more known about them with that up-tempo offense with Kevin Decker calling it for Grant Wilson, the new quarterback who thrived against Louisiana. What's kind of the feel for the Demon Deacons, and how important is it to generate takeaways, which they've done here in a couple of games, to get the Monarchs off the field and dodge that early upset bid, if you will?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Wake adjusts to now. Wake plays fast offensively, or it can. It likes to kind of set up and have the ability to work through plays quickly. And they've been working all week on the speed of the Monarch offense, and that'll the first couple of series. Be interested to look and see how Brad Lambert's defense adjusts, gets lined up. I mean, you got to get lined up against the Monarchs, or they're gonna big play you if you don't. So we'll see how that goes. They've worked awful hard on it this week. I was at practice on Thursday morning and purposely stayed with the defense, and that's what they were doing, just working on getting lined up as quickly as they could. But yeah, the respect certainly goes to Coach Ronnie and the new system they put in there offensively. And I was talking Thursday night to Coach Clausen about the offense. Did it mirror what Coach Ronnie did when he was a great quarterback himself? He said no, and he's changed it from what he did at Penn State. So you have to give credit to him for changing, for having the vision to do that and mesh that with the players that he's got, or match those two things together, system and players. So we'll see how it shakes out. That's the fun part of these games, right? You never know what you're going to see until you get two teams together and their systems mesh and all the X's and O's start getting bounced around all over the table. So that's why I love doing what I do, because you just what are we going to see today? That's kind of the deal that we approach it with every single Saturday. So, again, anxious to see these two line up and see how it shakes out.
Absolutely. A couple more here for Stan Cotten, the fine play-by-play voice for the Wake Forest Demon Deacons, part of the Wake Forest Sports Network from Learfield. Follow him on X, once known as Twitter, at Stan Cotten WF here. And we appreciate you coming on here with us on the podcast. But before we let you run here, I got two more to finish up with you, Stan. And as you look at the Monarchs as far as having a chance to pull off the upset, or the Demon Deacons to pull away from this game and not make it tight as a couple of touchdown favorite here, what's the matchup that you think can be the most significant in terms of advantage or disadvantage? Is it how the Demon Deacons contain Grant Wilson or can maybe disrupt the offense? Is it maybe Old Dominion's defense with a tackling machine and Jason Henderson at linebacker taking away perhaps the running element to make the Demon Deacons one-dimensional a bit, pin their ears back? What's kind of the couple of matchups? You mentioned special teams being possibly an X factor here, as the Demon Deacons have done well there, that could swing this game and make it either lopsided or very close and upset potential in your eyes.
Yeah, turnovers in any game are huge, and Wake's done a nice job of taking the ball away and protecting it when they've got it. And I think if they can, maintain that kind of focus, they'll be fine. I think Wake's defense has to get ODU off the field, and again, that we'll see how those first two drives. If Wake's able to get lined up and get ready, I think they'll be fine. And Wake did a great job last week against Vanderbilt on fourth down, including a huge goal line stand that really injected some life into all phases of the game. But again, if Wake turns it over 2-3 times, and that's not Wake, but if that happens, certainly on the road, that's not going to be a good indicator. But if Wake can take it away like it has been doing, that certainly is a good indicator. And special teams, again, I just and I know that over the last few years anyway, Old Dominion's blocked a lot of kicks. I don't think they have this year any, but last year they were incredible. And Vanderbilt got close a couple times last week to blocking a punt. But so all those things, it's not that different every week, Matt, really. If you turn it over a lot, you're probably not going to lose, or probably not going to win. If you protect the ball, play good special teams, by and large, you got a really good chance to win it. If Wake can be balanced, that's what they want to be. Last week they ran the ball more than they've thrown it, and they've just been a passing machine the last few years. But if they can establish a running game and open up that pass game a little bit, be balanced, Wake will be fine. And but I know Old Dominion certainly doesn't fear Wake Forest, and you just have to look at what they've done the last 2-3 years against ACC teams to know that. So again, I think there's a lot of respect between the coaching staffs, and I can promise you, being at practice this week, Wake respects Old Dominion, and going on the road to Norfolk to play is not an easy task. And Wake's got their full attentions on this game, and so I think they'll play well because of that. I expect ODU to play well. I expect it to be a good game. I really, really do.
Absolutely. They don't want to get caught looking ahead of the Georgia Tech matchup. Then they get the bye week in Clemson to turn the calendar from September to October. And get you out on this then. Your sense of the ACC early on here. We sort of touched on it about Florida State. Looks like that national championship level contender. Clemson had that one blemish. Duke's a surprise. UNC's ranked. What's your feel? Is there a team lurking out there? And the Deacs could certainly be one of those sleepers. We've seen teams like Wake, like Pittsburgh a couple of times that have come out of nowhere to go play in the ACC championship game, not getting a lot of the national buzz and notoriety, if you will. What's kind of your early sense of the ACC as we get to it before the conference games begin, if you will?
Well, Florida State's got my eye. I mean, the Seminoles look like, the old some of the old Bobby Bowden teams, and that's not good for the rest of the teams in the league. Wake's had really good success over the Seminoles the last few years under Coach Clausen. Clemson hasn't looked exactly, like you expect the Tigers to look, but any team that's got to change at quarterback, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get some things ironed out. Matt, I think it's just kind of early. As you mentioned, though, Duke looked really, really good and focused at home under Mike Elko, who was a Dave Clawson assistant before he left and went to Notre Dame and A&M. But I think Coach Elko will have Duke looking that way pretty much every week. I mean, they're a team that you can't mess with now that he's there. And Wake, we'll see how the Deacs develop. But if Wake can run the ball like it did last week, Wake's schedule is tough. It is in the league, but again, Wake has found a way over the last few years. But I think right now, most people, and it's not a stretch to look at Florida State as the team that most folks will be chasing here in 6-7 weeks. So we'll let the season play out. Wake's first ACC game is next week against Georgia Tech. I can promise you, Wake's concerned about the Monarchs, and that's it. That's kind of the marching orders that the Deacs have. Their deal is, let's try to get 1-0 this week and move on to the next one. It's cliche, yes, but I think that mentality has certainly served Wake well over the last 9-10 years under Dave Clawson. So the ACC will be an interesting league, but I think it's better when Florida State is good, and Florida State looks really good.
A lot of games that you have to worry about, but first and foremost is Old Dominion coming up for the Deacs on this Saturday. And then you've certainly got some in-state rivals like Duke on the road, NC State. Clemson's a biggie. They go to Blacksburg in October. Pitt comes to town, and I know Wake Forest fans are circling that November 18th trip to South Bend to go see old friend Sam Hartman and the Fighting Irish as well. Well, Stan Cotten, always a pleasure. Make sure you follow him on X or Twitter, as many of you still call it, at Stan Cotten WF, and listen to him on the Wake Forest Sports Network from Learfield Audio. Enjoy the game, your time in Norfolk. Welcome to the 757. Look forward to catching up with you again soon. And I know it's going to be a fun football year for you and the Deacs, as well as your Dallas Cowboys. I see the background there of the Cowboys, a nice 40-0 shellacking of the Giants. So it could be a fun ride into the playoffs this year, and maybe a trip to the Super Bowl if they play like they did on Sunday night against Big Blue.
I don't know about that. Sunday night was a good start for the Cowboys, but I go way back to the Tom Landry days in the 1960s. So I've been a Cowboy fan for a long time. We'll see. A good start for them, and looking forward to the trip to Norfolk. Hope to get some good seafood Friday night and see a bunch of good athletes running around on the field on Saturday come noontime.
There you go. If you ever need some restaurant tips, hit me up. We'll definitely take care of you. Stan Cotten with Wake Forest, the play-by-play voice. Thank you. Always a pleasure, and we'll talk to you again soon.
You bet, Matt. Thanks for the invite. See you soon.
You got it. That's 757 Saturday Sports Talk. Our special guest this week, the Wake Forest play-by-play man, Stan Cotten. We'll take a timeout and come back with more. Take your questions on our mailbag, and you'll hear from some of our sponsors next right here on Hatfield and Young at the Plex. It's 757 Saturday Sports Talk.